The stars outside the ship were cold and quiet. The undying throne floated in the dark like a sleeping giant, its hull the size of a small city, its weapons enough to crack open a mountain. Commander Veth Saral stood at the observation deck and looked at the small blue planet below. It looked soft. It looked easy. She had done this 14 times before. 14 worlds, 14 victories. She had never lost a single soldier to an enemy she had not already studied and planned for. She was not worried now either. Her aide, a young officer named Drell, walked up behind her and handed her a data sheet. The full survey report, Commander. Biology, atmosphere, gravity, terrain, all complete. Veth Saral took the sheet and read it slowly. She was tall, even for a Keth. Her bones were light and long, built for the soft pull of her homeworld, where gravity barely held things down. Her kind had evolved in a world that was gentle, a world that did not fight back. The planet below was called Earth. She read the gravity figure first, 9.8 meters per second squared. She read it again. Her jaw tightened just slightly. That was more than double the gravity of the Keth homeworld. She had conquered a world with higher gravity once before, a rocky, dead place with no life and only mineral value. But this world had life. Complex life. Life that walked on two legs, and built things, and fought wars with itself. They live in this gravity? She asked. Yes, Commander, Drell said. They are born in it. They grow up in it. They die in it. Their entire biology is built around it. She set the data sheet down and looked at the planet again. It was covered mostly in water. The land parts were brown and green. From this distance, it looked peaceful. What does the xenobiology team say about them? Drell pulled up a second report on his own screen and read from it. Class 3 soft biped. Average height between 1.6 and 1.9 meters. Lifespan of 70 to 90 cycles. Chemically dependent on oxygen. Physically fragile compared to most species we have encountered. No natural armor. No natural weapons beyond flat teeth and weak claws. They rely almost entirely on tools. Veth Saral nodded slowly. And their military? They fight each other constantly, Drell said. There are hundreds of different groups on the planet, and they have been at war with one another for their entire recorded history. Their weapons are primitive compared to ours. Metal projectiles. Chemical explosions. Nothing that can harm our hull armor at range. So they are divided and primitive. Yes, Commander. She turned away from the window and walked toward the war table at the center of the observation deck. The table lit up with a glowing map of Earth. 3 red dots appeared on the map, her chosen landing zones. 1 in South America, 1 in Central Asia, 1 in the middle of a flat, dry continent in the southern hemisphere. We use protocol mimicry, she said. It was not a question. Protocol mimicry was the Dominion's greatest invasion tool. Before any landing, the gravity emitters aboard the assault carriers would be calibrated to match the target planet exactly. Soldiers would live and train in that gravity for 30 full rotations before touching the ground. By the time boots hit the soil, the soldiers were already adapted. The planet held no advantage. It had never failed. Drell nodded. The emitters are already being calibrated, Commander. 9.8 meters per second squared. Training begins tomorrow. She gave a small, satisfied nod and looked at the 3 landing zones on the map. The South American site was a dry desert with almost no population nearby. The Central Asian site was a flat plain, easy to move across. The Southern Continent site was remote and isolated. All 3 were chosen for exactly those reasons. 40,000 soldiers, she said. 3 simultaneous landings. They will not be able to respond to all 3 at once. We hold the landing zones, build forward bases, and expand from there. Within 30 rotations of landing, we will have footholds on every major continent. Drell was writing everything down. And if they resist, they will resist, she said calmly. They always resist. But resistance is not the same as winning. We will be ready for their gravity. They will not be ready for us. The next day, training began. The gravity emitters deep inside the assault carriers hummed and shifted. The floor got heavier. Keth soldiers felt it immediately. a pressing, pulling weight that was new and unpleasant. They were told to walk, then to jog, then to carry equipment. The first drill lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, 2 soldiers had collapsed. One had a stress fracture in his lower leg. The medical team treated him and filed the injury under a standard training report. These things happened. The training officer in charge of the South American Strike Force, a veteran named Grath, watched his soldiers struggle through basic movement drills with growing concern. They stumbled. They breathed too hard. Their legs trembled. He had never seen his unit look like this. He filed a detailed report that night. He described the difficulty his soldiers were having. He used careful, precise language. He said the gravity was more challenging than the simulations had suggested in early planning stages. He said he believed the soldiers needed more time. The report was received by a logistics officer 3 levels below Veth Saral. The logistics officer noted that the report existed, marked it as within acceptable parameters, and filed it away. It never reached the commander. Training continued for 28 more rotations. By the end, the soldiers were better. They could walk without falling. They could carry weapons. They could run for short distances without immediate injury. The medical team reported a higher than average number of minor fractures and joint strains during the training period. But these were treated, and the soldiers were cleared for deployment. Veth Saral reviewed the final readiness report herself. She saw the injury numbers, but the soldiers were cleared. She trusted her system. She had built it over 14 campaigns. On the night before the landing, she stood in front of 40,000 soldiers in the main deployment bay. They were fully armored. They stood in long, clean rows. The bay was enormous, and the light was sharp and white. She walked slowly across the front of the formation and looked at them. They were ready. She had made sure of it. "We have broken worlds of fire and ice," she said. Her voice carried easily across the bay. "We have taken worlds that burned, and worlds that froze. We have never been stopped." She paused and let the silence sit for a moment. "Tomorrow, we take this small, wet, divided little world. Its gravity is heavy, but we trained. We are ready. We will be done before their own sun rises twice." The soldiers responded with a sharp, synchronized sound, a Keth battle acknowledgement. It echoed in the bay. She nodded once and walked away. In the dark outside the ship, the small blue planet continued turning slowly, completely unaware that 40,000 soldiers were one sleep away from its soil. The alarm went off at 4 in the morning. Sergeant Major Adaise Okonkwo did not groan. She did not slam the alarm off and go back to sleep. She sat up, put her feet on the cold floor, and was standing before most people would have even opened their eyes. She had been waking up like this for 16 years. Outside the small window of her quarters, the Atacama Desert was still dark. The sky was a deep, clear black, with more stars than most people ever saw in their lives. The base was quiet except for the distant sound of a generator and the wind moving across the flat, dry ground. She pulled on her clothes, laced her boots, and walked out into the cold desert air without hesitating. The cold hit her face and she breathed it in. Then she began to run. She ran up the hill behind the base. It was not a small hill. It was steep and loose with gravel, and the kind of slope that made most people slow down to a fast walk. She ran it, full pack on her back, 40 kilograms of equipment bouncing against her spine with every step. Her boots dug into the gravel, and she pushed through it with her legs, like she had done 1,000 times before. At the top of the hill, she stopped. She looked out at the desert below, and the dark mountains in the distance. Then she turned around and ran back down. By the time she returned to the base, her unit was already assembling in the yard. 12 soldiers, all ages between 20 and 32, standing in 2 rough rows, stretching and yawning, and complaining about the cold. "Corporal Reyes," she said as she walked past him, "your boot is untied." Reyes looked down. "It is not, Sergeant Major. It will be by the time we're done," she said without slowing down. "Let's go." They ran for an hour. Then they did weighted squats in the yard with heavy bars across their shoulders, counting out loud, the numbers echoing in the still desert morning. then pull-ups on a rusted metal bar bolted between two posts near the far fence. Adais did 20 without stopping, then dropped off the bar and began her briefing while her soldiers were still gasping. She was like that. She always had been. Her soldiers did not resent her for it. They were too busy being the best unit on the base to have time to resent anything. None of them knew there was a fleet of alien warships in orbit above them. None of them knew that drone cameras the size of insects had been watching the base for 11 days. None of them knew that the footage of their morning drills had been transmitted up to a Keth survey ship and reviewed by 3 different xenobiologists, all of whom had filed the same conclusion. Abnormal physical output for a Class 3 soft biped. Requires further observation. Nobody had followed up on those reports either. Across the world, in a small monitoring station on the outskirts of Ankara, Turkey, a man named Dr. Emre Yilmaz had not slept properly in 3 weeks. He was not a soldier. He was not a government official. He was a scientist who studied signals from deep space, and 3 weeks ago, he had found something that had no good explanation. A set of signals, moving and structured and repeating in a pattern that natural phenomena did not produce. He had checked his equipment 4 times. He had run the analysis 6 times. The signals were real, and they were getting closer. He had written a formal report and sent it to the National Science Authority. They had acknowledged receipt. He had sent a follow-up. They had said it was under review. He had then sent the raw data directly to 3 different international space monitoring agencies. 2 of them had sent polite replies asking for clarification. 1 had not replied at all. He had then done something that made him feel slightly desperate but completely justified. He had called a journalist. The journalist had listened carefully and then explained, very kindly, that without confirmation from an official body, the story was unpublishable. Emre had put down the phone and stared at his screen. The signals were now close enough that he could estimate their origin point with some confidence. They were not from a comet. They were not from a pulsar. They were from structured, manufactured objects moving in formation. He wrote 1 more email. This time he sent it directly to the office of the UN Emergency Defense Coordination Unit, a small, underfunded department in Geneva that was technically responsible for exactly this kind of thing. He put everything in the email, every data point, every chart, every analysis. He titled it, Urgent Confirmed Non-Natural Signal Formation Approaching Earth Orbit. Then he made coffee and waited. In Geneva, a coordinator named Liang Fang received the email at 10 in the morning, at local time. She was in the middle of reviewing a budget report and almost did not open it. The subject line was the kind of subject line that usually meant a very enthusiastic amateur with a telescope and too much free time. But she opened it. She read it once quickly. Then she read it again slowly. Then she called her technical advisor into the office and asked him to look at the data without telling him what it was or where it came from. He came back 40 minutes later and set the printed pages on her desk. He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "A scientist in Ankara," she said. "Is it real?" He looked at the pages again. "I would need to verify it through our own systems. But if this data is accurate..." He stopped. "If it's accurate," she said, "then something very large is about to reach Earth orbit," he said. "And it's not something we put up there." Liang Fang closed the budget report and picked up the phone. Back in the Atacama, Adai's unit had finished their morning session. She was sitting on a low wall near the yard, eating an orange, and watching 2 of her youngest soldiers argue about something. Private Tamara Osei was insisting that her record on the obstacle course was faster than Private Jimenez's. Jimenez was equally insistent that she was wrong. "Run it again," Adais said without looking up from her orange. They both ran it again. They came back panting and arguing louder. She looked up at the sky without thinking about it. Just a habit. She liked the sky in the desert. It was wide and honest. No buildings in the way, no haze, just open space going up forever. She looked at it for a moment longer than usual, and then finished her orange and stood up. "All right," she said. "Weapon maintenance. Now. Let's go." Her soldiers groaned and moved toward the equipment shed, still arguing about the obstacle course. She followed them, already thinking about the afternoon schedule. Above her, invisible and silent, the Keth fleet moved into position. The landing happened at dawn. 3 massive Keth assault carriers broke through the cloud layer at the same time in 3 different parts of the world. Each one was the size of a stadium. They came down fast and loud, burning hot lines across the morning sky, and touched down with a sound like thunder that rattled windows hundreds of kilometers away. On the Undying Throne, Commander Veth Saral watched the live feeds from all 3 landing sites on the large screens in the command center. The carrier in South America had landed in the dry flat of the Atacama. The one in Central Asia had touched down on the Kazakhstan steppe. The one in Australia had settled onto the red, empty desert of the interior. All 3 ramps came down at the same moment. She had choreographed it that way. Deployment beginning, Drell reported from the station beside her. All 3 sites nominal. Gravity at landing zones confirmed 9.8. Soldiers are beginning to exit. She nodded and watched. The first soldiers walked down the ramps. They moved carefully. They had trained for this. 30 rotations of living under Earth-level gravity had changed their bodies somewhat. They were not the same soldiers who had started the training program. They were heavier in the muscle, slower in the joint, more cautious in the step. But they were walking. That was the point. The first few dozen came down the ramps at the South American site and spread out across the flat ground. They moved in the practiced formation she had drilled into them. Weapons up. Eyes forward. Controlled and professional. Then the next group came down. And the next. Veth Saral watched the feed carefully. The soldiers looked slower than she would have liked. Their movements were stiff. There was something almost labored about the way they carried themselves on the ground. She told herself this was normal. The simulations had always shown this kind of initial adjustment period. It would get better in the first hour, as the bodies adapted. At the South American site, a battalion commander named Heth was leading the ground advance. He stepped off the ramp and immediately felt the gravity settle on him like a physical weight across his entire body. He had felt this in training. He knew what it was. He took 1 step forward and then another, and told himself it was fine. He was 40 meters from the ramp when the first soldier behind him went down. It was not a fall, it was a collapse. A sound like a crack, and then the soldier simply folded sideways and hit the ground with a heavy thud. The medical team was on him within seconds. He was not shot. He was not hit by anything. His left femur had fractured from the load. Heth looked back and kept moving. 1 injury. It happened. Then another soldier went down. Then 2 at once. The medical reports started coming through the command channel. Stress fracture. Vertebral compression. Hairline crack in the tibia. 1 soldier had made it 60 meters from the ramp before both knee joints gave out simultaneously. By the time 8 minutes had passed, nearly 40 soldiers were on the ground in various states of injury. None of them had been shot. None of them had encountered any resistance. The planet itself was doing this. On the Undying Throne, Veth Saral watched the medical alerts stack up on the side of her screen. Her jaw tightened. She did not speak. She waited. She told herself it was the initial adjustment. The first wave was always the hardest. Then the human soldiers arrived. At the South American site, Adaiz's unit had been scrambled within minutes of the carrier coming down. They were in vehicles and moving before most of the base had even processed what was happening. Adaiz sat in the front of the lead vehicle, with a rifle across her lap, and her eyes on the horizon, where a column of dark smoke was rising from the direction of the alien landing. "How many are we looking at?" she asked into the radio. "Unknown," came the reply from the base commander. "Satellite images show a large ground force deploying from the craft. Approach with extreme caution." She looked at her soldiers. Corporal Reyes was adjusting the strap on his helmet. Private Osei was checking her weapon with quick, practiced hands. Everyone in the vehicle looked calm the way experienced soldiers look calm, not because they were not afraid, but because they had learned to put the fear somewhere small and manageable, and then do the job. "Okay," Adaiz said. "We push in, we assess, we adapt. Questions?" Nobody had questions. They pulled up 300 meters from the landing site and went the rest on foot. What they found was not what any of them expected. The alien soldiers were there. There were hundreds of them, tall and strange, wearing armor that looked like nothing she had ever seen. But most of them were not fighting. Most of them were not moving at all. They were on the ground. They were being attended to by other aliens who seemed to be carrying medical equipment. Some were holding themselves up on their weapons like crutches. Some were crawling. "What is happening to them?" Reyes said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "I have no idea," Adai said. She kept her rifle up, but she was scanning the scene in front of her with her eyes trying to make sense of it. "But they are not in a combat posture. Watch the ones still standing." The ones still standing were watching the humans approach, with what could only be described as confusion, mixed with something closer to horror. Here were these short, compact creatures moving at a full, easy jog across the same ground that was breaking Keth soldiers apart. Moving without strain. Without any visible effort. Just running across the desert like it was nothing. One Keth soldier raised his weapon. His arm was shaking badly under the weight of it. He got it halfway up, and then the effort was too much, and it dropped. He was not choosing to stand down. His body was not cooperating. The firefight, such as it was, lasted less than 11 minutes. The Keth soldiers who could still function fought hard. Adais respected that. But their aim was poor because their hands were not steady. Their movements were slow because every step cost them more than it should have. Her unit moved around them quickly, stayed low, used the terrain, and communicated with short, clean radio calls. When it was over, 34 Keth soldiers had surrendered or been taken down. 0 humans were injured. The ground around the landing site was scattered with aliens sitting or lying on the hard desert floor. Most of them in pain. Most of them looking at the humans with expressions that Adais could not read. She walked among them slowly, checking the situation. Her rifle was still up, but her finger was nowhere near the trigger. Near the edge of the site, a Keth soldier was propped against a piece of equipment from the carrier. It was large, probably over 2 meters when standing. Though it was not standing now. One of its legs was clearly broken. The armor on its chest was scratched from the fall. It watched Adais approach. She stopped a few feet away and crouched down to its level. The alien looked at her. Its eyes were wide and strange, and she could not tell what it was thinking. Then, it made a sound. The sound meant nothing to her directly, but she had been told at the briefing that the translation systems would be available within hours. She did not need a translation to understand the tone of it. The tone was the same in any language. It was the tone of something that had been completely certain about the world and had just discovered it was completely wrong. She stood up and got on the radio. "Site secure," she said. 34 prisoners. Most need medical attention. Send the medics in." She paused. "Treat them the same as ours." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Sergeant Major, they're the invaders. They're broken, and they surrendered," she said. "Send the medics." The command center of the Undying Throne was silent, except for the sound of data terminals running and the low hum of the ship's systems. Commander Veth Saraal stood at the center of the room and looked at the screens. All 3 landing sites were on the screens at once. All 3 were the same story. Soldiers down. Soldiers broken. Humans walking among them like it was nothing. She had been standing there for 40 minutes without speaking. Her senior officers stood behind her at a careful distance. Nobody wanted to be the first to say anything. Finally, Drell spoke. He could not help it. "Commander, total confirmed combat ineffective 1,407 soldiers across all 3 sites. The South American force is fully compromised. Kazakhstan is at 30% functional. Australia is at 42%. Functional," she repeated, still looking at the screens. "Able to stand and hold a weapon," he said. She turned around and looked at her officers. They were all watching her. They were all waiting for her to tell them what was happening, because none of them understood it either. "Get me the xenobiology team," she said. "All of them. Here. Now." The xenobiology team arrived within 20 minutes. There were 6 of them. They looked nervous. They should have looked nervous. Veth Saral did not raise her voice. She was not the kind of commander who raised her voice. That made it worse, somehow. "Tell me," she said, "about human bone structure." The lead xenobiologist, a thin scientist named Pell, opened a screen and began pulling up data with quick, slightly shaking hands. Human bone structure is significantly denser than Keth bone. The trabecular architecture, the internal lattice structure, is much more developed. The cortical walls are thicker. The joints are reinforced with multiple layers of connective tissue. Why? She said. Pell hesitated. Why? Why are they built like that? He looked at his data, and then at her. Because of the gravity, he said quietly. Their gravity has always been 9.8. Their entire skeletal system evolved under that load. Over millions of years, every generation that was born with bones too weak died before they could have children. Every generation with bones strong enough survived. The ones alive today are the result of millions of years of that selection. She said nothing. She waited. He kept going because the silence demanded it. Their muscle density follows the same pattern. Their hearts are larger relative to body size than almost any species we have catalogued. A Keth heart pumps blood through a body in low gravity. A human heart pumps blood upward through a body that a planet is constantly trying to pull down. The heart has to be stronger. It has always had to be stronger. One of the other scientists, a younger one named Voss, spoke up. He seemed to be working something out as he talked. Commander, our simulations were calibrated correctly. 9.8 meters per second squared. Our soldiers trained in that gravity, but the simulations were only 30 rotations. Human children spend 18 years, hundreds of rotations, developing in this gravity before they are even considered adults. And then they spend their entire lives in it. You cannot replicate that in 30 rotations. So our soldiers were never actually ready, she said. The room was very quiet. No, Pell said carefully. They were more ready than they would have been without training. But they were never ready in the way a human is ready. A human does not prepare for their gravity. They simply live in it. It is the only world they have ever known. She turned back to the screens. What about their military? Voss was already pulling up the drone footage from the South American site. He ran the section where Adaiz's unit approached the landing zone. Watch this, he said. She watched. She watched the small, compact humans move across the same ground that had broken her soldiers. They moved at a jog. They moved with full equipment. They moved without strain, without hesitation, without any sign that the gravity was something they were managing. They moved through it the way you move through the air, without thinking about it at all. They run like this regularly, Voss said. The surveillance footage from before the landing shows the same unit doing this every morning at 4 o'clock. Not because they were preparing for an invasion. It is their normal routine. She turned to look at him. Every morning, he said. She looked at the footage again. She watched Adaiz jog across the screen and disappear behind a piece of cover. There is something else, Pell said. He seemed reluctant to say it, but said it anyway. Humans exercise voluntarily. Outside of military service, they have an entire culture around it. They run for pleasure. They lift weights for recreation. Their children play physical games from birth. Every human soldier we have recorded did not become physically capable because of military training. They were already this way before they enlisted. The military training only refined what was already there. Vethsaral closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she opened them. Can our soldiers adapt? Given enough time? Pell was quiet for longer than she would have liked. Given 3 to 5 generations of intensive biological adaptation programs, with genetic modification, perhaps. A single generation of soldiers, no. She walked to the far side of the room and stood with her back to everyone for a moment. One of her oldest military instincts was telling her to find another angle of attack. There was always another angle. You never had only one option. But when she turned around, she knew what she had to say. Pull the ground forces back to the carriers, she said. All of them. We do not send more soldiers down. The room absorbed that. Nobody spoke for a moment. Commander, said one of her senior tactical officers carefully, if we pull back, the other worlds in the Dominion will hear of it. It will be seen as, I know what it will be seen as, she said. Pull them back. Then get me an open channel to the High Dominion Council. I want an authorization for orbital bombardment. She said it cleanly, the way she made all difficult decisions. Not with anger, not with panic, with the flat logic of someone who had run out of other options. But deep inside, she already sensed how the council would respond. Orbital bombardment was a last resort, and last resorts were admissions of failure. The Dominion did not bomb worlds it could not occupy. That was not conquest. That was destruction. And destruction was not power. It just looked like power. That night, alone in her quarters, she pulled up all the xenobiology data herself and read through it until the early hours. She read about human cardiovascular systems. She read about bone density tables. She read about the history of human warfare, which was long and extremely violent and almost entirely against other humans. She stopped at one section and read it twice. It was a note from Voss, added to the report after the landing. It said, "Among the footage reviewed, human soldiers have been observed assisting injured Keth personnel at the South American site. They are providing medical care to the captured soldiers. This behavior was not anticipated." She sat back and looked at the ceiling of her quarters. Then she thought about something her philosopher caste advisor had said to her years ago, before her very first campaign. He had said, "The most dangerous thing you can ever face is not a creature that is strong. It is a creature that is strong and does not know it needs to be afraid of you." She had not understood it then. She thought she understood it now. The High Dominion Council denied the orbital bombardment request in less than one rotation. The denial came back through official channels in cold, formal language. The Council did not explain its reasoning in detail. It did not have to. Veth Saral understood it immediately. 3 other worlds currently under Keth occupation were watching this campaign. 2 more were in early negotiation phases. If the Dominion bombed a planet it could not put soldiers on, every one of those worlds would know. Every species watching would understand the real message. The Keth had found something they could not walk through. That was more dangerous than losing one world. That was a crack in the image that held the entire empire together. She read the denial twice and then set it down and did not look at it again. She drafted the request for diplomatic contact herself, in her own words, not using the standard Dominion template. She framed it carefully. She called it a strategic reassessment of terms, rather than a negotiation. She used language that left space for the Council to interpret the contact as a choice, rather than a necessity. She was very good at language like that. On Earth, Liang Feng received the contact request and sat with it for a long time before calling anyone. When the emergency UN session convened by hologram 4 hours later, there were 42 representatives on the call from 31 countries. The room in Geneva where Liang sat was the only room that actually had people in it. Everyone else was a face on a screen. The question of who should lead the negotiation took almost 2 hours. Several governments wanted military representatives. Several others wanted politicians. One country suggested a panel of 6 people from different fields. Liang had a different suggestion. "Dr. Emre Yilmaz," she said. The room went quiet. A few faces on the screens looked confused. Liang explained. She said that Emre had been the first person to detect the fleet, that he had been sending warnings for 3 weeks before anyone listened, that he was a scientist who understood the data better than anyone in the room, and that he had no political stake in any outcome except the survival of the planet. There was a debate. There usually was. In the end, Liang got what she asked for. Emre found out he was Earth's lead negotiator via a phone call while he was eating lunch at his desk in Ankara. He sat very still for a moment after Liang told him. Then he said he needed a few hours to prepare. She said he had one. He showed up to the diplomatic interface chamber in Brussels wearing the same jacket he had been wearing for 2 days. It had a small coffee stain near the second button that he had not noticed. He carried a tablet with his data on it and a handwritten list of 7 points he had made on the plane. The Keth delegation appeared on the large screen at the far end of the room as a holographic image. There were 4 of them. Veth Saral was not among them. She was watching from the ship. The 4 Keth facing him were diplomats, tall and still, wearing formal Dominion clothing that made them look composed and deliberate. They looked at Emre for a moment. He looked back at them, and then at his tablet, and then sat down in the chair in front of the screen and put his water cup on the table. "Good morning," he said. "Or whatever time it is where you are." The lead Keth diplomat, whose name translated roughly as Vel, looked at the translator unit on the table and then back at this human. "We expected a military representative," Vel said. "I'm a scientist," Emre said. "I study things. I found you 3 weeks ago when nobody else was looking. I thought that qualified me." Vel did not reply to that. Emre opened his tablet. "I'll keep this short because I don't think it needs to be long. Earth cannot be occupied by your forces. Your biology doesn't allow it. I have the medical data from the soldiers who were treated after the landing, and I've had 3 biologists review it in the past 12 hours. Your bone density is roughly 40% of ours. Your muscles were not built in this gravity. This is not an insult. It's just physics." He paused to let the translation catch up. "Sending more soldiers will produce the same result," he continued. "Orbital bombardment has been denied by your own council, which I understand. So we're here." He set the tablet down. "Earth is not going to be part of the Dominion. That outcome is not available. But there are other outcomes, and some of them are actually good for both of us." Vel leaned forward slightly. "You are very direct. I've been trying to get someone to listen to me for 3 weeks, Emre said. "I'm done being indirect." He then laid out the counterproposal. Earth would sign a formal non-aggression framework with the Keth Dominion. The Dominion would receive exclusive trading access to several categories of Earth resources that Keth surveys had already flagged as valuable: certain rare Earth metals, specific biological compounds derived from Earth's extreme environments, pharmaceutical precursors that evolved only under high-gravity conditions. Earth, in return, wanted something specific from the Dominion: access to faster-than-light communication technology, medical data exchange, and a formal acknowledgement that Earth was a sovereign world. He slid a printed copy of the proposal across the table toward the camera. He knew they could not take it. It was a gesture. It made the thing feel real. On the ship, Veth Saraal watched the entire negotiation without speaking. When Emre finished laying out the terms, she heard one of her advisors murmur that the human was asking for quite a lot. She said nothing. She was thinking about something else. She was thinking about the footage of the Keth wounded soldiers being treated by human medics. She was thinking about the 4-billion-year history of gravity, turning soft organic matter into something that ran uphill at 4 in the morning for recreation. She was thinking about the philosopher-cased advisor and what he had said about creatures that were strong without knowing they needed to be afraid. The negotiation took 6 hours. The final agreement was close to what Emre had written on the plane. The Dominion gave ground in quiet ways that preserved enough face for the Council to present it favorably at home. The humans got the acknowledgement they needed. When the screen went dark at the end, Emre sat alone in the room for a moment and looked at the blank screen and then at his notes. He had circles and arrows all over the page, and he wasn't sure half of it was legible. Liangfang came in from the side room where she had been watching. She sat down across from him. "You did well," she said. "I spilled coffee on my jacket," he said. "Before or after the negotiation?" "Before," he said. She smiled. 3 days later, the Keth fleet pulled out of Earth orbit. It moved slowly and in good order, the way a retreat looks when the people retreating are trying to make sure everyone knows they chose to leave. Veth Saraal watched the planet fall behind through the observation deck window. It got smaller, and then it was just a blue dot, and then it was gone. Her aide Drell appeared beside her. "The Council wants a full report on the campaign." "I know," she said. "I've been writing it." He was quiet for a moment. "What do we tell the other worlds?" She thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. The diplomatic answer was too thin. She looked at the space where Earth had been and found something in the middle. "Tell them," she said, "that there is a world in the mid-arm of a spiral galaxy where the sky is blue and the gravity will kill you. Tell them the creatures who live there run toward it every morning before the sun comes up. Tell them we chose not to find out what else they run toward." Drell wrote it down without comment. Back in the Atacama Desert, on the morning after the treaty was signed, Adaiz's alarm went off at 4 o'clock. She sat up, put her feet on the cold floor, and was standing before anyone else would have opened their eyes. She walked outside. The desert was still dark. The stars were bright. The air was cold and clean. She pulled the pack onto her back and felt the familiar weight of it settle across her shoulders, and she started up the hill. Behind her, the sound of boots on gravel. She glanced back. Private Ose was pulling her own pack on and starting up after her, eyes still half closed, jaw set. Then Reyes. Then 3 more. Nobody had told them to come. Nobody had ordered it. They just came. She turned back to the hill and ran. Halfway up, the young private named Torres, who was 17 days into the unit and still finding his legs, pulled up beside